In the frozen wastes of Alaska's elite sniper training facility, a female combat veteran was about to face the impossible. What started as a routine Arctic warfare exercise took a shocking turn when 23 elite operators came face to face with something that would shatter every assumption they held about capability and courage. Sergeant Rowan Hayes wasn't your typical training candidate. For 8 years, she had spent her life in combat zones, from Afghanistan to Syria, known for her exceptional marksmanship and tactical intelligence that saved countless lives, until the day her warnings were ignored and her squad paid the ultimate price. When she encountered Lieutenant Marcus Frost, systematically sabotaging her equipment, manipulating her scores, and engineering her isolation, she had no idea she was walking into a battle that would define her legacy. Hayes responded with a display of skill and determination that would lead to the most unconventional tactical demonstration in program history. What began as whispered mockery, the ghost, they called her, because nobody expected her to last, would become legend when she deliberately submerged herself in a frozen river during the final evaluation. The Arctic training facility would never be the same after she emerged from beneath the ice shelf, dripping and unstoppable, completing her mission faster than any candidate before her, while the elite operators who doubted her stood frozen in awe and fear. This is the story of how one woman transformed prejudice into power, sabotage into triumph, and a nickname meant to dismiss her into a legacy that would reform an entire training system, proving that the most dangerous opponent is the one everyone underestimates. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The C-130 touched down on the frozen runway with a shudder that rattled Sergeant Rowan Hayes' teeth. Through the small porthole window, she watched the Alaskan wilderness unfold in endless white, a desolate expanse where sky and snow merged into a single, colorless void. The Arctic training facility squatted on the tundra like a wound, its utilitarian buildings dark against the ice. Rowan shouldered her gear bag and descended the ramp into air so cold it seized her lungs. The wind cut through her parka with surgical precision, and she understood immediately that this place would tolerate no weakness. Around her, other candidates emerged from the aircraft: SEALs, Marine Recon, International Special Forces operators, each moving with the easy confidence of men who had already proven themselves in a dozen different hells. She was the only woman. The realization settled over her like the falling snow. Not unexpected, but confirmation always carried weight. She pulled her collar higher and followed the group toward the main compound, her boots crunching against ice that probably had been frozen since before she was born. "Check it out," a voice carried on the wind. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now." Laughter, low and dismissive. Rowan kept her eyes forward, her expression neutral. 8 years in combat zones had taught her to conserve energy for battles that mattered. The compound's briefing hall was marginally warmer than the exterior, though breath still clouded in the air. Rowan claimed a seat in the back corner, noting positions and faces with practiced observation. 23 men filled the room, their tactical gear bearing insignias from 5 different nations. Elite didn't begin to describe this assembly. These were the operators who train operators, the 1% who pushed beyond every limitation. A tall figure entered from the side door, and conversation died. Commander Briggs moved like a glacier, slow, inevitable, crushing. His weathered face could have been carved from the same ice that surrounded them, and his eyes held the flat assessment of someone who had watched too many people fail. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the gravel of Arctic winds. He paused, scanning the room until his gaze found Rowan. "And Sergeant Hayes, Welcome to the Joint Special Operations Arctic Sniper Program. You're here because someone, somewhere, believes you represent the top 1% of long-range marksmen in your respective services. Briggs clasped his hands behind his back, pacing the front of the room with measured steps. The Arctic is humanity's oldest enemy. It doesn't care about your gender, your nationality, or your ego. It will find your weakness and exploit it without mercy. Nature is the primary adversary here. Your fellow candidates are merely competition. A hand raised near the front. Briggs nodded. Commander, what's the washout rate? 67%. Briggs let the number hang in the frozen air. Most quit in the first week. The cold strips away bravado faster than any drill instructor. Those who remain face increasing difficulty until only the exceptional survive. Another figure rose from the front row, turning to address the room with easy confidence. Lieutenant Marcus Frost wore his seal trident like a crown, and his smile carried the practiced charm of someone who had never been told no. Commander, with respect, I notice we have a candidate recovering from a prior injury. His gesture toward Rowan appeared casual, almost sympathetic. Given the extreme physical demands, shouldn't there be medical clearance standards? Murmurs rippled through the room. Rowan felt the weight of 24 gazes, assessing, judging, dismissing. She kept her face expressionless, but her right hand unconsciously moved to her left thigh, the legacy of an IED in Syria, metal fragments still lodged near her femur. Lieutenant Frost, Briggs's voice carried ice, are you suddenly concerned with program administration? No, sir, just operational safety. For everyone. Every candidate here has medical clearance or they wouldn't be sitting in this room. Your concern is noted and irrelevant. Briggs swept his gaze across the assembly. You'll be issued cold weather gear, assigned quarters, and expected at the firing range at 0600 tomorrow. First light waits for no one, and neither do I. Dismissed. The room emptied in a controlled rush, candidates eager to claim the best bunks and inspect equipment. Rowan waited, letting the crowd thin. As she stood, Frost appeared beside her, flanked by 2 other SEALs. Hayes, right? His smile didn't reach his eyes. Listen, no hard feelings about the question, just looking out for the team. I didn't realize we were a team, Lieutenant. Oh, we will be. Tight quarters, extreme conditions, we'll know each other real well by the end. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried to his companions. Between you and me, though, the nickname's already started. They're calling you the Ghost. One of his friends snorted, because nobody expects her to last long enough to matter. They moved past her, their laughter echoing in the concrete hallway. Rowan remained motionless for 3 breaths, then shouldered her bag and headed toward the barracks. The Ghost. Fine. Let them think her insubstantial, easily dismissed. Ghosts had a way of haunting those who underestimated them. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving snow horizontally across the compound. Rowan paused on the steps, studying the landscape that would define the next 8 weeks. Mountains rose like fangs against the darkening sky. The frozen tundra stretched endlessly, beautiful and lethal. Somewhere out there, beneath layers of ice and snow, the land held secrets, frozen rivers, hidden crevasses, terrain that could kill as efficiently as any enemy. She had trained for deserts and cities, mountains and jungles, but this was different. The cold was already seeping through her layers, finding gaps in her armor. By tomorrow she would understand its patterns, by next week she would know its rhythms. And by the time Frost and his friends finished laughing, she had made the Arctic her ally. Sergeant Hayes. She turned. A younger man, maybe mid-20s, stood in the doorway. Hispanic features, quiet eyes that held calculation rather than judgment. His name tape read Vega. Corporal? Bunk assignments are posted. You're in Building C, 2nd floor. He hesitated. 3rd rack from the door, if you want to avoid the draft. Thank you. Vega nodded once and disappeared back inside. A small gesture, practical rather than friendly, but noted nonetheless. In an environment designed to isolate her, even neutral courtesy felt like reconnaissance, mapping allies and enemies, identifying who might be swayed and who was already entrenched. Rowan made her way to Building C, claimed her assigned bunk, and began the methodical process of preparing her gear. Around her, other candidates settled in with varying degrees of noise and camaraderie. No one spoke to her directly. Several made a point of moving to bunks farther away, as if failure might be contagious. She didn't blame them. In their position, she might have done the same, eliminating variables, reducing complications. These men had built careers on calculated risk, and she represented an unknown quantity in an already hostile environment. As darkness fell over the compound, Rowan lay in her bunk and listened to the wind shriek against the building's metal skin. Tomorrow would bring the first evaluations, the first opportunities to prove herself or confirm their doubts. Frost would be watching, looking for weaknesses to exploit. Briggs would be assessing with cold objectivity, and the cold itself would be testing every candidate, searching for cracks in their resolve. Rowan closed her eyes and saw the faces of her old squad, the ones who hadn't made it home. They had died because someone ignored her intelligence report, dismissed her assessment of enemy positions. Being underestimated had cost them their lives. She would not let it cost her this opportunity. The ghost, they called her. Fine. Ghosts were patient. Ghosts were persistent. And ghosts, when the time came, could be absolutely terrifying. The 0600 muster felt like stepping into a deep freeze. Rowan's breath crystallized instantly, forming ice on her balaclava. The other candidates assembled on the range with varying degrees of discomfort, their expensive cold weather gear already showing limitations. Several were already stamping their feet, fighting the numbing cold that crept up from the permafrost. Briggs appeared precisely on time, flanked by 2 range officers and Lieutenant Frost, who now wore an assistant instructor's badge. The sight of it tightened something in Rowan's gut. Bad enough to face skepticism from peers, having a detractor in a position of authority multiplied the complications exponentially. "Equipment inspection," Briggs announced. "Present your primary weapons and optics for verification." The candidates formed a line at the inspection table. One by one, they unveiled their rifles. Remington MSR, Barrett MRAD, Accuracy International AXMC. Top-tier precision instruments, each worth more than a used car, bristling with the latest optics and accessories. Frost examined each weapon, nodding approval, making notes on his tablet. Rowan waited her turn, her rifle case feeling suddenly heavier. When she reached the table, she laid it down and popped the latches. The M40A5 inside looked exactly like what it was, a combat veteran. The stock showed scratches from Afghan rocks, the metal bore the patina of Syrian sand, and the scope had been replaced twice after IED concussions. But the action was glass smooth, the barrel was immaculate, and every component had been maintained with obsessive precision. Frost's eyebrows rose. "Is that a museum piece, Sergeant?" Laughter rippled through the candidates behind her. Rowan kept her voice level. "M40A5, sir. Personally qualified weapon, maintained to specification." "Maintained to specification." Frost lifted the rifle, examining it with exaggerated concern. "This is at least 2 generations outdated. Commander Briggs, Regulation 4.7 clearly states all candidates must utilize standard-issue equipment meeting current specifications." Briggs approached, his expression unreadable. He took the rifle from Frost, working the bolt, checking the action, peering down the barrel. The inspection lasted long enough that Rowan felt sweat forming, despite the Arctic cold. "Regulation 4.7, Briggs said, applies to basic training programs where consistency is paramount. This is a specialized course for expert marksmen. Candidates may use personally qualified weapons provided they meet accuracy standards." He handed the rifle back to Rowan. "You'll prove it performs or you'll replace it. Next!" Frost's jaw tightened, but he moved to inspect the next candidate's equipment. Rowan returned to her position in the line, aware of the mixed reactions around her. Some candidates looked impressed by Briggs's fairness. Others wore Frost's disapproval like armor, having already chosen their allegiance. The range itself was a testament to hostile beauty. Targets stood at intervals from 300 to 1,200 yards, each platform marked with wind flags that snapped viciously in the constant gale. The firing line consisted of elevated positions offering minimal shelter, just enough to prevent hypothermia, not enough for comfort. "First qualification round," Briggs announced. 3 shots at 300 yards. Establish your baseline accuracy. You'll fire alphabetically by last name." Rowan would be among the last shooters.
giving her time to study conditions and observe the competition. The first candidate took position, a Navy SEAL named Anderson, whose gear suggested unlimited funding. His shots grouped within 2 inches, respectable but not exceptional. Others followed with similar results. The cold affected everyone, causing minor tremors, affecting trigger discipline. At 300 yards, even small errors became visible. When Frost took his turn, he made a show of it. Smooth, controlled, finishing with a 1.2-inch group that drew appreciative murmurings. "That's how it's done," he announced. "Loud enough for everyone to hear. Proper form, proper equipment, proper results." His gaze found Rowan. "Let's see if vintage performs as well as modern technology." She approached the firing line, feeling the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. The cold bit at her exposed skin, but she long ago learned to compartmentalize discomfort. Her injury throbbed. It always did in the cold. But pain was information, nothing more. Settling into position, Rowan let her training take over. Breathing steady, heart rate controlled. The rifle settled against her shoulder like an old friend, familiar and trusted. Through the scope, the target appeared crisp despite the distance and blowing snow. Frost positioned himself directly behind her. Remember, proper form is essential. Female physiology typically struggles with recoil management due to upper body strength limitations. Don't be discouraged if you need additional attempts.
The words were designed to distract, to plant doubt. Rowan let them wash over her like wind, acknowledged, then dismissed. Her world contracted to the target, the crosshairs, the rhythm of her breath. First shot. The rifle barked, the recoil absorbed through proper positioning rather than resisted. She didn't need to check the target. The shot felt good. Second shot. Adjust for the memory of wind. Squeeze. Third shot. Same point of aim. Complete the group. The range officer raised his binoculars, studying the target for longer than previous evaluations. "Sergeant Hayes, grouping 0.73 inches. Silence, then a ripple of surprise through the candidates. At this level, sub-MOA accuracy was expected, but 0.73 was genuinely exceptional, better than half the shooters who had gone before, better than Frost's demonstration. Rowan cleared her weapon and stood, her expression neutral. Frost appeared beside the range officer, demanding to inspect the target himself. She watched him study it through binoculars, looking for any excuse to dismiss the result. "Beginner's luck," he announced finally. "Let's see that consistency throughout the day." The morning's success felt increasingly distant as Frost began organizing the afternoon exercises. He moved through the candidates with his tablet, assigning partners for spotter-shooter drills with what appeared to be careful consideration. But Rowan watched the pattern emerge, experienced operators paired with other veterans, creating strong teams. Until he reached her. "Hayes, you'll partner with Sanders." Private First Class David Sanders was 22, fresh from his unit sniper school, and had shown the weakest performance that morning. His 3-shot group had measured over 4 inches, and his hands had trembled so badly with cold that he needed 2 attempts to load his magazine. He stood apart from the other candidates, young and obviously intimidated by the company of elite operators. "Sir, wouldn't Sanders benefit from pairing with a more experienced? Are you questioning my judgment, Sergeant?" Frost's smile was polite, his voice carrying to the assembled candidates. "I thought you'd appreciate the chance to mentor someone. Or perhaps you're not confident in your teaching abilities." The trap was obvious, but there was no way around it. "No, sir. Sanders and I will make it work." "Excellent." Frost moved on, pairing the remaining candidates with practiced efficiency, everyone else receiving partners who would elevate their performance. The spotter-shooter exercise required partners to work in rhythm. The spotter calculated wind drift, elevation adjustments, and target movement while the shooter executed. Success demanded seamless communication built on mutual trust and shared experience. It was designed to identify teams who could operate under pressure. Rowan approached Sanders, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the permafrost. "Relax," she told him. We'll start simple. Call the wind and I'll adjust. Build the rhythm. Yes, Sergeant. His voice barely carried over the Arctic wind. They took position at their assigned firing point, naturally the platform with the most exposure to crosswinds. Rowan settled behind her rifle while Sanders peered through the spotting scope, his inexperience in his uncertain movements. Wind call? She prompted. Right to left, maybe 5 miles per hour? Rowan glanced at the flags. The wind was gusting 7 to 9 miles, shifting constantly. Check the flags at each interval. The wind 300 yards out affects the bullet differently than the wind at 600 yards. Right. Sorry. Let me... Sanders fumbled with his range cards, dropping one into the snow. He scrambled to retrieve it, panic making him clumsy. They burned through 3 shots before Sanders managed a halfway accurate wind call. By then, Frost was circulating among the teams, making notes with obvious satisfaction as he observed their struggles. Other teams were performing well, their experienced spotters feeding confident corrections. Consistency issues already, he announced, loud enough for all teams to hear. Remember, this program requires dependable performance under all conditions. Some partnerships are demonstrating that capability, others... He let the implication hang.
By the end of the exercise, Rowan's score was significantly degraded from her morning performance. Sanders looked miserable, aware that he'd been set up to fail and had fulfilled that expectation perfectly. "Good effort, Sanders," Rowan told him as they cleared the range. "Tomorrow we'll start earlier, practice the wind calls before the official exercise." Sanders shifted uncomfortably, not meeting her eyes. "Actually, Sergeant, I've already requested a different partner. Lieutenant Frost suggested I might learn better from someone with more teaching experience." The words landed like ice water. Rowan kept her expression neutral. "Understood. Good luck." She watched Sanders hurry away, joining a cluster of candidates around Frost. The lieutenant's hand landed on Sanders' shoulder, consoling, paternal, building loyalty while simultaneously isolating her. It was textbook manipulation, and it was working. That evening, Rowan found Corporal Vega outside the barracks, methodically cleaning his rifle in the fading light despite the brutal cold. His movements were practiced, almost meditative. "Mind if I ask you something?" she said. Vega didn't look up. "Free country, mostly. Is Frost creating obstacles for certain people, or am I being paranoid?" Now Vega paused, his hands stilling on the cleaning rod. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "Define obstacles. Bad partners? Exposed positions? Equipment checks that always seem to conflict with prep time? Noticed that, did you?" Vega resumed cleaning. "Not my business to say, but I've seen enough ops go bad because someone decided they knew better than the intelligence they were given. Usually ends poorly for everyone." It wasn't quite advice, but it was acknowledgement. Rowan filed it away. Not an ally yet, but not an enemy either. In this environment, neutrality might be the best she could hope for. The next morning brought new partner assignments. Rowan found herself paired with Robinson, another young candidate for the long-range cold-bore exercise. First shot from a cold barrel, testing pure accuracy without benefit of fouling shots. She arrived at the assigned platform 10 minutes early, only to find Robinson absent. Frost appeared instead. "Bad news, Hayes. Robinson's running a fever. Medical's keeping him off the range." "I'll need a spotter for this exercise, sir." "Unfortunately, everyone else is already paired. You'll have to calculate your own adjustments." His expression was sympathetically false. "Unless you need to withdraw, no shame in recognizing when conditions exceed capabilities." Through the window of the mess hall, Rowan could see Robinson clearly, laughing with other candidates, looking perfectly healthy. The realization settled cold and hard in her chest. This wasn't just bias or prejudice, this was deliberate, systematic sabotage. "I'll manage, sir," she said evenly. Frost's smile suggested he'd expected nothing less. "Excellent. Remember, this exercise counts for 20% of your overall evaluation. Alone on the platform, Rowan set up her shot with meticulous care. The target stood at 800 yards, a realistic engagement distance. Without a spotter, she had to calculate wind drift across the entire range herself, estimate temperature effects on trajectory, and adjust for the elevation difference. It was doable, but it eliminated the margin for error that made spares successful. She took her time, double-checking each calculation. Through her scope, she could see other teams working smoothly, spotters feeding confident data while shooters executed with precision. The isolation felt deliberate, as if the entire range had conspired to highlight her solitude. First shot. She watched through the scope as the bullet impacted 4 inches left of center. Not terrible, but not the precision expected at this level. Wind call was off, but she'd only gotten 1 shot. Cold bore meant 1 attempt. She recorded her data and cleared the platform.
The 1400 slot meant shooting during peak wind, when conditions were most unstable. Every other candidate had been assigned morning or late afternoon windows when the air was calmer. Rowan noted it on her personal log without comment. At lunch, she sat alone, using the time to review ballistic tables and prepare for the challenging conditions. Vega entered the mess hall, grabbed his tray, and after a moment's hesitation, took the seat across from her. "Your scope get knocked around?" he asked quietly. "Something like that." "Mine too. Night before last." Vega kept his eyes on his food. "Took me 2 hours to recalibrate. Almost missed the morning formation." Rowan looked at him directly. "Who else?" "Barrett mentioned it. Chen too. Anyone who isn't—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Anyone who isn't in Frost's inner circle. "Has anyone reported it?" Vega's laugh was bitter. "To who? Briggs judges results, not process. Frost is the assistant instructor. The other range officers rotate through and barely learn our names." He finally met her eyes. "This is how it works. The strong survive, the weak adapt, and everyone else gets pushed out. Frost is just accelerating the process for people he's decided don't belong. And you're okay with that?" "I'm okay with keeping my head down and graduating." Vega stood, tray in hand. "But I'm not okay with pretending I don't see it, for what that's worth." He left before Rowan could respond. It was something, not an alliance, but an acknowledgement. In this environment, that might be enough. The 1400 shooting slot was brutal. Wind gusts exceeded 15 miles per hour, shifting direction every few minutes. Rowan spent 10 minutes just reading conditions before attempting her first shot at the 1,000-yard target. The bullet drifted wide, despite her calculations. Through the spotting scope, she watched other candidates on different ranges, shooting in stable conditions, clustering their groups with precision. Her next 3 shots showed improvement as she learned the wind patterns, but her aggregate score remained below her capability, exactly as Frost had planned. That evening, Rowan conducted a careful inventory. Her cold-weather gear had been subtly tampered with, zippers loosened, insulation compressed in key areas. Her boots showed signs of someone trying the laces. Her spare magazines had been removed from her vest and replaced slightly out of order. Each instance was small, deniable, but the pattern was unmistakable. She photographed everything with her phone, documenting angles and details. If this escalated further, she wanted evidence. But even as she did so, Rowan knew that evidence meant little in an environment that valued results above all else. Frost was smart enough to leave no direct proof, and his position as assistant instructor provided perfect cover. The question wasn't whether she could prove the sabotage. The question was whether she could overcome it anyway. The stealth infiltration exercise represented the program's most demanding challenge. Candidates would navigate 2 miles of frozen terrain in ghillie suits, reaching observation points undetected before executing precision shots and extracting without exposure. The exercise tested endurance, patience, and the ability to become invisible in a landscape that offered no natural concealment. Rowan collected her issued ghillie suit from the equipment room, noting immediately that it felt heavier than expected. A quick inspection revealed extra material sewn into the backing, not enough to be obvious, but sufficient to add 3 or 4 pounds to an already cumbersome load. Worse, small bells had been attached to interior points, designed to make noise with movement. She removed what she could without damaging the suit, but some modifications were sewn too deeply to extract without proper tools. The bells she carefully silenced with tape, buying herself some advantage but not eliminating the problem. The pain in her thigh started 20 minutes into the approach march. Old injury, cold weather, extra weight. The combination was predictable but still debilitating. Rowan forced herself to maintain pace, knowing that falling behind would only confirm the doubts she was fighting against. Other candidates moved through the snow like predators, smooth, controlled, efficient. Rowan's progress felt labored by comparison, the additional weight throwing off her rhythm. She could feel eyes on her, judging, assessing, dismissing. The observation point required crawling the final 200 yards across open tundra. Rowan's injury screamed with each movement, but she continued with mechanical determination. Mind over body, mission over comfort. The lessons that had kept her alive in combat zones now kept her moving through the Arctic hell. She reached the firing position with 15 minutes remaining in the time window, adequate but not impressive. Through her spotting scope, the target stood at 700 yards, partially obscured by terrain features. A difficult but achievable shot. Rowan controlled her breathing, fighting the tremors caused by pain and cold. The first shot felt good, and through her scope she watched the impact. Center mass. Relief flooded through her. Whatever Frost had done to undermine her approach, the shot itself was clean. Extraction was where everything fell apart. The additional weight, combined with her taxed injury, slowed her egress beyond acceptable limits. She watched other candidates ghost past her position, their movements fluid and controlled. By the time Rowan reached the extraction point, she was the last to arrive, well outside the designated time window. Frost stood at the collection point, tablet in hand, face arranged in false sympathy. "Tough day out there, Hayes. The cold really exposes physical limitations, doesn't it?" He made a notation on his screen. "Clean shot, but failed extraction. Overall grade, incomplete." The word felt like a knife. Incomplete didn't just mean failure, it meant she'd have to repeat the exercise or face elimination from the program. Around her, successful candidates stripped off their ghillie suits, their relief obvious. She was the only failure. Briggs appeared beside Frost, reviewing the results. "Sergeant Hayes, your approach time was acceptable. Your shot was exceptional, but your extraction exceeded the window by 9 minutes. That's unacceptable in a real operation." "Yes, sir." There was nothing else to say. "You'll have one opportunity to repeat this exercise at the end of week 6. If you fail again, you're out." Briggs's expression showed nothing. No sympathy, no hostility, just cold assessment. Dismissed. Rowan returned to the barracks in silence, her ghillie suit feeling like a lead weight. In her bunk, she finally removed it and discovered the full extent of the sabotage. Not just extra material and bells, but padding positioned specifically to aggravate her injury site. Whoever had modified it knew exactly where her weakness lay. The depression that settled over her that night was familiar, the same emptiness she'd felt in the hospital after the IED, when doctors told her she'd never return to full active duty. The sense of being broken, inadequate, a liability rather than an asset. Her squad had died because she'd been dismissed, and now history was repeating itself in this frozen wasteland. Later, she found an envelope slipped under her door. Inside, a single printed page, a draft dismissal report, authored by Lieutenant Frost, citing her as a safety risk and recommending immediate removal from the program. It wasn't official yet, but the message was clear. He was building a case for her elimination. Rowan sat on her bunk, holding the paper, feeling the weight of failure crushing down. She could quit, pack her gear, acknowledge the reality that this environment was beyond her capabilities, and return to civilian life with whatever dignity remained. It would be easier, simpler, expected. Or she could fight back. Rowan spent the next day moving with deliberate purpose. If Frost was building a case against her, she would build one of her own, not to file a complaint, but to arm herself with leverage. Her first stop was the medical office. The program physician, a gruff Army doctor named Captain Morrison, looked up from his paperwork with surprise. "Sergeant Hayes, something wrong?" "I'd like to request a copy of my medical file, sir, specifically the injury report and current capabilities assessment." He studied her for a moment. "This about Frost's questions during the brief?" "It's about understanding my own limitations accurately, sir." He printed the documents without further questions. The report was thorough. Yes, she had sustained significant trauma, but her recovery had been exceptional. Current assessment, fully capable of all standard military activities with no restrictions. The injury was noted, but not classified as limiting. "For what it's worth, I've seen men with perfect bodies wash out in the first week because they couldn't handle the cold. You're still here. That counts for something." Her second stop was the equipment room, where the range master, a retired Marine named Gunny Sullivan, managed the facility's impressive arsenal. He found him inventorying cold weather gear. "Gunny, I have a question about equipment assignment procedures." Gunny looked up, his weathered face curious. "Shoot." "Who determines which candidate gets which gear? Training slots? Platform assignments?" "Assistant instructors handle the details. Briggs sets the overall schedule, but day-to-day logistics fall to Frost and the rotating officers." His eyes narrowed. "Why?" She chose her words carefully. "I've noticed some inconsistencies. My gear tends to be heavier. My slots tend to hit worse weather. My partners tend to be less experienced." "You think someone's stacking the deck." "I think someone might be introducing variables that make objective assessment difficult." Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a logbook. "Equipment assignments are logged here. Weights, issue times, return conditions. You want to see your records compared to others?" "If you're willing to show me." He opened the book to the relevant dates. The pattern was undeniable. Rowan's issued gear consistently showed higher weights. Her time slots consistently aligned with poor conditions. Her platform assignments consistently put her at disadvantage. All within the range of random variation individually, but collectively forming a clear pattern. "Interesting," Sullivan said neutrally. "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. Yet." Rowan photographed several pages with her phone. "But I'm documenting the pattern." "Smart." Sullivan closed the book. "For what it's worth, I've seen Frost work before. He's good at what he does, but he likes his teams a certain way. Doesn't appreciate disruption to his vision." That evening, Rowan found Vega outside the barracks again, this time field stripping his rifle despite the brutal cold. She sat beside him without invitation. "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." Vega's hands never stopped moving. "Maybe." "If I attempted something that made Frost look bad, really bad, would you back me up if asked?" Now his hands stilled. "Define back me up." "Tell the truth about what you've observed. The sabotage, the patterns, the deliberate obstacles." "That's a dangerous game." "I know." Vega resumed working on his rifle. "What are you planning?" "There's an old test that Briggs supposedly offers to candidates who want to prove themselves. The blindfold test. 10 shots at 500 yards, no visual reference, pure technique and instinct. I've heard of it. No one's passed in 3 years. I'm going to request permission to attempt it. Rowan met his eyes. And I'm going to succeed. When I do, Frost will have to acknowledge my capability or reveal his bias publicly. That's assuming you can actually do it. I can. Vegas studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. If you pull that off, yeah, I'll back you up. But Hayes, don't miss, because if you fail, Frost will have the ammunition he needs to bury you for good. Rowan requested a meeting with Briggs the next morning. He received her in his office, a spare room that reflected his personality, functional, minimal, uncompromising. Sergeant Hayes, what can I do for you? Sir, I'd like to request permission to attempt the blindfold test. Briggs's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Interest, perhaps, or calculation. You understand the stakes? Failure means immediate dismissal from the program. I understand, sir. You also understand that this test is designed to be nearly impossible? It's not about proving skill. It's about breaking candidates who have too much pride to recognize their limitations. Yes, sir. Briggs leaned back in his chair, studying her. Why? Your scores are marginal, but passing. You could potentially graduate without taking this risk. Because marginal isn't good enough when people doubt you should be here at all, sir. I need to prove beyond any question that I belong. And if you fail, then I don't belong. Briggs was silent for a long moment. The test is scheduled for 3 days from now. You'll shoot last, after everyone else has attempted it. That's maximum pressure. I understand, sir. Dismissed. For the next 3 nights, Rowan trained in secret. She waited until the barracks quieted, then slipped out to a remote section of the range that wasn't actively monitored. Without permission to be there, she was violating protocol, but the risk seemed minimal compared to what she was attempting. In the Arctic darkness, lit only by stars and the occasional aurora, Rowan practiced the fundamentals until they became meditation. She closed her eyes and fired round after round, learning to feel the rifle's balance, to sense the wind through pressure on her skin, to know the moment of perfect trigger break through muscle memory rather than sight. The cold was absolute, testing her focus with each passing minute. Her injury throbbed constantly, but she learned to incorporate the pain into her awareness rather than fight against it. Everything became data. Temperature, wind, heartbeat, breathing, the subtle shift of weight as she settled into position. She practiced until her hands moved without thought, until the rifle felt like an extension of her body, until she could predict impact points from the sound of the shot and the feel of recoil. The night became her ally, teaching her to trust senses beyond vision. On the second night, Barrett discovered her. He watched from the shadows for several minutes before speaking. That's quite the risk you're taking. Rowan lowered her rifle. Barrett, want a spot for me? I want to understand what you're doing. I'm proving I belong here. Barrett approached her, studying her setup. Frost is going to be watching. He'll be waiting for you to fail. I know. And you think you can actually do this, 10 for 10. I don't think, I know. Barrett was quiet, then nodded slowly. I'll spot for you. And Hayes, when you pull this off, because I'm starting to believe you will, I'll make sure everyone knows what really happened. The sabotage, the obstacles, all of it. Why? Because I didn't spend 20 years in law enforcement tolerating corruption just to watch it happen here. Now, show me what you got. By the third night, Rowan had achieved something approaching certainty. Her body knew the rhythm, her mind trusted the process, and her spirit had found the cold determination that had carried her through combat zones. The blindfold wouldn't handicap her, it would simply remove a distraction. As she returned to the barracks before dawn, she found Vega waiting outside. "You've been training at night?" "Yes." "Frost knows. He saw you heading out last night. He's planning something for the test." Vega's expression was troubled. "I don't know what, but he's too confident. Be ready for him to try something." "I will be." "Hayes, do me a favor and destroy him. Not for you, for everyone else he's crushed over the years." Rowan nodded once, then headed inside to grab 2 hours of sleep before the day that would define her future. Tomorrow, the ghost would become legend, or she would disappear entirely. Either way, the whispers would end. The morning of the blindfold test arrived with deceptive clarity. No wind, temperature holding at -20, visibility extending for miles across the white expanse, perfect conditions that would make any failure entirely the shooter's fault. 24 candidates assembled at the range, though the number had dwindled from the original class. 7 had already washed out, unable to handle the relentless cold and pressure. Those who remained represented the elite of the elite, and even among them, tension crackled like static electricity. Briggs stood at the range head, a black blindfold dangling from his hand like a challenge. The blindfold test is optional, but permanent. Attempted and fail, you're dismissed immediately. Succeed, and you will have proven something about yourself that goes beyond marksmanship. He paused, scanning the assembled candidates. The test is simple. 10 shots at 500 yards. You'll be blindfolded after assuming your firing position. No visual confirmation of target, no checking conditions. Pure technique, muscle memory, and instinct. In 3 years, no candidate has achieved more than 6 hits. Frost stepped forward, his assistant instructor badge catching the pale sunlight. Candidates will fire alphabetically. Each shooter gets 1 attempt. The blindfold stays on until all rounds are fired. Rowan's position as Hayes meant she'd shoot near the middle, enough candidates before her to establish the difficulty, enough after to maximize pressure. She wondered if that was accident or design. The first candidate, Anderson, approached the line with visible confidence. He'd been one of the program's top performers, a SEAL with extensive combat experience. After settling into position, Briggs secured the blindfold. Anderson fired methodically, his form perfect, his rhythm controlled. 6 hits out of 10. The result was simultaneously impressive and disappointing. Anderson removed his blindfold looking satisfied. He'd matched the program's best recent performance, but also frustrated. Even excellence had been insufficient for perfection. 3 more candidates followed with similar results. 5 hits, 6 hits, 4 hits. The pattern emerged quickly. Experienced shooters could rely on technique to achieve roughly 50% accuracy, but without visual feedback, precision degraded with each shot as variables compounded. Frost took his turn with theatrical confidence. "Let me show you how it's done." He settled behind his rifle, a state-of-the-art precision instrument worth more than some cars. Briggs secured the blindfold, and Frost began firing with smooth, measured timing. His form was textbook perfect, his breathing controlled, his trigger discipline impeccable. 7 hits. A murmur ran through the candidates. 7 was the highest result in program history. Frost removed his blindfold with a satisfied smile, acknowledging the scattered applause. His gaze found Rowan, and the challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. "Beat that, Ghost," someone muttered, drawing nervous laughter. More candidates attempted and failed to match Frost's performance. Barrett managed 6 hits, his law enforcement background evident in his steady execution. Vega achieved 5, looking frustrated with himself. The morning wore on, and the best result remained 7. Finally, Briggs called, Sergeant Hayes, you're up. Rowan approached the firing line, aware of every eye on her. The weight of the moment pressed down like the cold Arctic. This wasn't just about shooting, it was about every doubt, every whispered comment, every deliberate obstacle she'd overcome. This was her answer to all of it. She settled into position, feeling her rifle nestle against her shoulder like it belonged there. The old M4OR5, scarred by combat, weathered by the elements, mocked by frost and others, but it was hers, and she knew every quirk of its behavior. Briggs approached with the blindfold. "Ready, Sergeant Hayes." "Yes, sir." The world went dark. Without sight, her other senses sharpened instantly. She felt the slight breeze on her exposed skin, left to right, maybe 3 miles per hour at ground level. The temperature on her face told her about air density. The rifle's weight distribution revealed how the cold had affected the metal. Everything she'd practiced in the frozen nights coalesced into wordless awareness. First shot. She found the natural respiratory pause, the moment between breaths where her body achieved perfect stillness. Her finger took up the trigger slack with practiced pressure, and the rifle barked. The recoil felt right. The resistance exactly what she expected. Hit. She couldn't see the target, couldn't verify, but her body knew. Second shot. Same breath, same pressure, same perfect moment. The rifle was an extension of her intent, not a separate tool. Hit. Third shot. A ghost of wind touched her cheek, carrying information. She made a microscopic adjustment, barely conscious of the decision. Fired. Hit. Around her, Rowan sensed the crowd's growing attention. The silence had changed quality, anticipation replacing skepticism. But she existed in a space beyond their observation, alone with her rifle and the rhythm that transcended sight. Fourth shot. Fifth shot. Sixth shot. Each round fired felt inevitable, correct, like solving an equation where only one answer existed. Her injury throbbed with each recoil, but the pain was simply more data, more information feeding into her awareness. Seventh shot. She'd matched Frost's performance, and 3 rounds remained. The pressure should have been crushing, but Rowan felt only clarity. This was why she'd survived combat zones. This was why she'd endured the sabotage. This moment, stripped of everything except pure capability. 8th shot. 9th shot. 2 perfect executions, mechanical in their precision. 1 round left, and she knew, absolutely knew, where it needed to go.
10th shot. The rifle fired, recoiled, fell silent. Rowan cleared the weapon with practiced movements, then reached up to remove the blindfold. Briggs stopped her hand. "Leave it on, until we verify." The walk to the spotting scope felt eternal. Rowan stood in darkness, listening to boots crunching on frozen ground, hearing the murmur of disbelieving voices, feeling the Arctic wind, and knowing that her future balanced on what came next. "Sergeant Hayes!" Briggs's voice carried something she'd never heard from him before, genuine surprise. 10 hits, center mass, every single one, grouping under 8 inches at 500 yards. He removed her blindfold personally, and Rowan blinked against the sudden brightness. Through the spotting scope, she could see her target, 10 holes clustered in the target's vital zone, the kind of grouping that would be impressive with visual confirmation, impossible without it. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Barrett started clapping, slow and deliberate. Vega joined him, then others, until applause rolled across the frozen range. Not polite, not obligatory, genuine recognition of something extraordinary. Frost stood apart from the group, his expression carefully neutral, but his jaw was tight and his eyes held barely contained fury. He'd been beaten, publicly and undeniably, by the candidate he tried so hard to eliminate. Briggs addressed the assembled candidates. In 20 years of running this program, I've never witnessed a perfect score on the blindfold test. Sergeant Hayes has just set a new standard. He turned to Rowan directly. Well done. Thank you, sir. However, Briggs continued, and the crowd quieted. This was a demonstration of individual skill. You still need to complete the final evaluation, the live-fire demonstration before command staff. That exercise tests more than marksmanship. It tests adaptability under combat conditions. Frost spoke up, his voice carrying false enthusiasm. Commander, I'd be happy to design the final evaluation scenario, something that truly tests all capabilities in realistic Arctic combat conditions. Rowan saw the trap immediately. Frost would create conditions designed to negate her blindfold triumph, to expose some other perceived weakness. But before she could speak, Briggs nodded. Approved. You have 48 hours to prepare the scenario. Make it count, Lieutenant. Frost's smile was predatory. Oh, I will, sir. 2 days later, the final evaluation scenario was revealed during the pre-dawn brief. Command staff had arrived from Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, 2 colonels and a brigadier general, their presence elevating what was normally a routine graduation exercise into something resembling a formal demonstration. Frost stood beside Briggs, a tactical map projected behind him showing a terrain model that made several candidates shift uncomfortably. The scenario is a high-value target elimination in hostile territory. Each candidate will infiltrate to one of 3 designated firing positions, eliminate the target at 900 yards, and extract without detection. Time limit is 45 minutes from insertion to extraction. He highlighted a section of the map, and Rowan's stomach tightened. The terrain includes this partially frozen river. Ice conditions are unstable, some areas are solid, others are dangerous. Candidates must choose their approach routes carefully. One of the colonels spoke up. What are the safety protocols if someone breaks through the ice? Full rescue team on standby, sir, but I should note that in a real operation, breaking through would compromise the mission and likely prove fatal. Candidates are expected to demonstrate sound judgment in route selection. Frost's eyes found Rowan. Some candidates may find the conditions too hazardous given physical limitations. There's no shame in recognizing when a mission exceeds one's capabilities. The message was clear. He'd created conditions designed to break her, treacherous ice that would test her injury, a time pressure that would force risky decisions, and terrain that favored raw physical capability over precision and planning. The candidates deployed in staggered intervals. Rowan drew the final position, last to go, maximum pressure, and assigned the most difficult approach route that skirted closest to the unstable river ice. She watched from the staging area as other candidates infiltrated with varying degrees of success. Most chose routes that avoided the river entirely, accepting longer approach times for safety. 2 attempted to cross stable ice sections, gaining tactical advantage but exposing themselves to observation. The mock target, a human-shaped silhouette at 900 yards, remained unengaged by several candidates who ran out of time or couldn't find clear shooting positions. Frost executed his approach with calculated efficiency, crossing a section of solid ice that cut his infiltration time significantly. His shot was clean, his extraction smooth. Briggs marked him at 38 minutes total, the best time so far. Sergeant Hayes, Briggs called. You're up, final candidate. Rowan moved to the insertion point, studying the terrain with eyes that had learned to read landscapes for survival. The safe routes were obvious but time-consuming. The risky routes offered tactical advantage but exposed questionable ice for observation. The river itself flowed dark and lethal beneath its frozen surface, hypothermia waiting for anyone unlucky enough to break through. Then she saw the third option. The river curved through a section where overhanging banks had created a shelf of ice. Beneath it, the water flowed deep and black, but the shelf itself was thick enough to support weight. A candidate could use the space beneath the ice shelf as concealment, moving through a natural tunnel that would bypass observation points entirely. It was dangerous. It was unconventional. It required going into the water deliberately rather than avoiding it. It was perfect.
Rowan began her approach, moving with purpose toward the river's edge. I heard surprised murmurs from the observation post, candidates and command staff recognizing that she was heading directly toward the hazard zone Frost had designed to stop her. At the river's edge, she paused, studying the ice shelf structure. Solid enough. The space beneath offered maybe 3 feet of clearance above the black water. She could wade beneath it, using the ice as cover, emerging at a position that offered the perfect firing angle. "What is she doing?" someone muttered through the radio net. Rowan didn't give herself time to reconsider. She lowered herself into the water. The cold was absolute, overwhelming, a physical force that seized every nerve and demanded retreat. Water temperature maybe 35 degrees, cold enough to stop hearts, to freeze muscles, to kill in minutes. Her Arctic gear provided some insulation, but ice water found every gap, every seam, every exposed inch of skin. Rowan waded forward beneath the ice shelf, one hand on the frozen ceiling above, boots finding purchase on the river bottom. The world contracted to darkness and cold and the immediate necessity of movement. Stop and she'd freeze. Panic and she'd die. Forward was the only option.
The shelf extended maybe 50 yards, an eternity measured in hypothermic seconds. Rowan's injury screamed as cold water pressed against the old shrapnel wounds, but she pushed forward with mechanical determination. Ghost, they'd called her. Time to prove that ghosts could rise from frozen rivers. She emerged at the optimal position, water streaming from her gear, ice already forming on exposed surfaces. Through her scope, the target appeared crisp and clear at 900 yards. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the cold, adjusting for wind and elevation with the muscle memory that transcended physical discomfort. One shot. The rifle barked, and through the scope she watched the target take a center mass hit. Rowan didn't wait for confirmation. She reversed course, moving back beneath the ice shelf with the same determination that had carried her through. The cold had deepened from painful to dangerous, her core temperature dropping with each second in the water. But she maintained control, trusting her training, trusting her body's resilience. She emerged at the extraction point 29 minutes after insertion began, faster than Frost despite going through the river twice. The rescue team rushed forward with thermal blankets and warming equipment, but Rowan waved them back. She stripped off her soaked outer layers with steady hands, revealing dry, cold-weather gear beneath. She'd planned for submersion, waterproofing her core layers before insertion. "Sergeant Hayes," Briggs approached, his expression unreadable. "That was either the most tactically brilliant approach I've witnessed or the most reckless." Rowan met his eyes, water still dripping from her hair, ice forming on her skin. "It was both, sir. The mission required unconventional thinking." Behind Briggs, the Brigadier General stepped forward. She was a compact woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen combat in 3 different theaters. "Sergeant, in my 30 years of service, I've never seen a candidate deliberately submerge themselves in Arctic conditions during an evaluation. Ma'am, the river provided the optimal concealment and approach vector. Standard routes were predictable. And if the ice had collapsed? I assessed the structural integrity before committing, ma'am. The risk was calculated, not reckless." The general studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "That's the difference between following doctrine and understanding combat. Doctrine says avoid the water. Combat reality says use every advantage, even dangerous ones." She turned to Briggs. "Commander, I want this candidate's methodology documented for the training manual. This is exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we need from operators." Frost stood frozen, his carefully constructed scenario turned against him. He'd designed the river as an obstacle to break Rowan. Instead, she'd turned it into her weapon, emerging like some mythic figure from the depths, not just succeeding, but doing so in a way that terrified and inspired simultaneously. Vega approached Rowan as the command staff departed. "You're insane, you know that, right?" "Probably," she grinned, still shivering but feeling victorious. "But they'll remember it."
"The ghost," Barrett said, joining them. "Except now it's not mockery. It's respect, maybe even fear." Rowan looked back at the river, dark water flowing beneath solid ice, concealing depths that could kill or carry someone to victory, depending on courage and calculation. "Good," she said quietly. "Fear means they'll take me seriously." 6 weeks later, Sergeant Rowan Hayes stood in Commander Briggs' office wearing the insignia of a newly designated instructor. The graduation ceremony had concluded 2 hours earlier, with 16 candidates receiving their Arctic Sniper certifications. She'd finished ranked second overall, not first, because her sabotaged early scores still counted, but high enough to earn immediate instructor appointment. "Your first task," Briggs said, sliding a folder across his desk, "is to review program protocols and recommend changes. The command staff was impressed by your performance, but they also noticed certain irregularities during your training cycle." Rowan opened the folder, finding investigation notes that documented everything she'd suspected: Frost's equipment tampering, his manipulated partner assignments, his systematic attempts to engineer her failure. The evidence she'd gathered had been supplemented by statements from Barrett, Vega, and even some candidates she'd never spoken to, men who'd watched and recognized the injustice. Lieutenant Frost has been removed from the instructor program. He's been reassigned to administrative duties pending a formal review of his conduct. Several previous candidates have come forward with similar complaints. "I didn't file a formal complaint, sir."
"I know. You let your performance speak instead." Briggs leaned back in his chair. That was either very confident or very foolish. Possibly both. But it worked, and more importantly, it revealed systemic issues we need to address. He fixed her with a steady gaze. "I'm giving you the authority to restructure evaluation protocols. No more individual instructors assigning equipment or partners. Everything standardized, everything documented, everything blind. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir." "Good, because in 3 weeks, your first class arrives. 7 candidates, including 2 women and our first openly transgender operator. They're going to face the same doubts you did, the same whispers, the same pressure to prove they belong." Rowan felt the weight of responsibility settle across her shoulders, heavier than any gear she'd carried through the Arctic. "I'll make sure they get a fair chance, sir." "I know you will." Dismissed Instructor Hayes. 3 weeks later, Rowan stood before her first class. 7 faces showing varying degrees of determination, anxiety, and defiance. She recognized the looks. They were the same expressions she'd worn arriving at this frozen wasteland, unsure if she'd find opportunity or opposition. "Welcome to the Joint Special Operations Arctic Sniper Program," she began. "I'm Instructor Hayes. I completed this course 12 weeks ago, so I remember exactly what you're feeling right now. The cold, the doubt, the pressure to prove yourself." She paced before them, letting her words carry weight. "This program is designed to push you beyond what you think possible. The Arctic will test your physical limits. The evaluations will test your technical skills. And yes, some of you will face additional challenges, doubts about whether you belong here, whether you're strong enough, whether you fit the traditional image of an elite operator." Her gaze swept across the diverse faces. "I'm here to tell you that doubt is a weapon. You can let it destroy you, or you can transform it into fuel. I chose transformation. I became the ghost they said would disappear, and I turned that name into legend." She paused at a window overlooking the frozen range. "You'll notice some changes to program protocols. Equipment assignments are now randomized and weight verified. Partner selections are made blindly without instructor bias. Evaluation conditions are standardized across all candidates. These changes exist because the only thing that should determine your success is your capability and your will." She turned back to face them. "You're going to struggle here. You're going to hurt,
Doubt yourself. Wonder if it's worth it. But I promise you this. If you survive this program, you'll emerge knowing something profound about your own resilience. You'll understand that limits are often imposed by others, not by reality. One of the women raised her hand, a Marine sniper named Chen, with burn scars covering half her face. Instructor, did you really emerge from a frozen river during your final evaluation? Rowan smiled. I did. Not because I'm superhuman or because I don't feel cold. I did it because the mission required unconventional thinking, and I'd learned to use every advantage, even dangerous ones. That's what this program teaches, not just how to shoot accurately, but how to see possibilities others miss. She moved to a plaque she'd installed on the wall that morning, simple metal etched with words that captured everything she'd learned. Vision is overrated. Perception comes from within. That's your first lesson. What you see with your eyes is less important than what you understand with your mind. The blindfold test isn't about shooting in darkness. It's about trusting capabilities that run deeper than sight. Over the following weeks, Rowan implemented her reformed protocols with precision. Every candidate received identical equipment, standardized training slots, and fair partnerships. She pushed them relentlessly but equally, demanding excellence without bias. When they struggled, she shared her own failures. When they doubted, she reminded them how doubt could be transformed. Vega served as her assistant instructor, having requested the position specifically to work with her. Together, they created an environment where capability mattered more than appearance, where determination counted more than conformity. Barrett visited during the third week, observing evaluations with approval. You've changed this place. It's subtle, but it's there. The candidates compete with themselves instead of each other. The focus is performance, not politics. That's the goal. Make the only enemy the environment and their own limitations. The Brigadier General returned for the midterm evaluation, watching Rowan's class perform the blindfold test. 3 candidates achieved perfect scores, unprecedented results that suggested the new training methods were working. After the evaluation, the general pulled Rowan aside. I'm recommending you for advanced instructor certification. We want to implement your protocols across all special operations sniper programs. You've proven that eliminating bias improves performance metrics. Thank you, ma'am.
Don't thank me yet. This means more responsibility, more scrutiny, and more resistance from people who preferred the old ways. The general's smile was grim. You ready for that fight? Rowan thought about the frozen river, the blindfold test, the nights of solitary training in Arctic darkness. She thought about every whisper she'd endured, every obstacle she'd overcome, every moment she'd chosen to push forward when quitting would have been easier. I'm ready, ma'am. As her first class approached graduation, Rowan stood on the same firing range where she'd proven herself months earlier. The Arctic winds still cut with the same brutal precision, the cold still tested every weakness, but now she understood something fundamental about this place. The frozen wilderness didn't care about bias or prejudice. It didn't discriminate based on gender or appearance or background. It simply tested resilience, rewarded capability, and punished weakness, regardless of its source. That brutal equality had been her greatest ally. Now, as Instructor Hayes, she would ensure that human evaluation matched nature's impartiality. The ghost had become legend. The legend had become teacher. And the teacher would ensure that no future candidate faced the systematic obstacles she'd endured. On graduation day, all 7 of her first class received their certificates, the highest completion rate in program history. Chen, the Marine with the burn scars, achieved the top overall score. During her graduation speech, she thanked Instructor Hayes for proving that capability transcended appearance.
Rowan stood at attention as Briggs presented the certificates, feeling something she hadn't experienced since before the IED that ended her combat career. Purpose. Not just personal achievement, but the power to change a system, to open doors that had been closed, to ensure that the next generation of operators would be judged solely on their merit. As the ceremony concluded and candidates celebrated their graduation, Rowan returned to her office and found a letter waiting. Official correspondence from Special Operations Command. They wanted her to consult on equity protocols across all advanced training programs. The ghost was becoming an avalanche. She looked out at the frozen landscape, at the place that had tested her so brutally and ultimately validated her so completely. The Arctic had been her adversary and her proof, the environment that stripped away everything except pure capability. Somewhere out there, another candidate was arriving, facing doubts and challenges, wondering if they belonged. Rowan would make sure they got a fair chance to find out. The battle against prejudice was won one proving ground at a time, one candidate at a time, one instructor willing to demand better. And the ghost? She'd haunt these frozen ranges for years to come, a legend that whispered not of failure and disappearance, but of resilience, transformation, and the terrifying power of someone who refused to be dismissed. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.